Hello my dear friends and family, I'm Operator Starsky with the most recent updates on Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine. Let's talk about Russia's movements, Ukraine's response, which settlements have been liberated from the Russian terrorists recently, what the economic and logistical pressure on Russia looks like, and what to maybe expect next. This is the Frontline Focus. Let's roll. On the night of September 13, a Russian drone entered Romanian airspace. That came just days after a Russian drone incursion into Polish airspace on the night of September 9 to 10. What we can see is that these incursions into NATO countries bordering Ukraine are basically turning into a regular pattern. Unfortunately, we came to this point in time when it's absolutely pointless to just observe Russian invasion taking place just across the border and expect that nothing bad happens to you, which is something not only Ukraine has warned about because we're dealing with the Russian terrorism. This is something actually history itself is supposed to teach people. In response to the earlier Polish incursion, Poland authorized NATO reinforcements for its Operation Eastern Sentry. That shows that these drone violations are provoking specific defensive moves instead of just diplomatic protests, like we could observe many times before, and that NATO is treating these as serious border security incidents instead of trying to hide these violations or pretend that they were just accidental. Meanwhile, Russia and Belarus are continuing the Zapad 2025 joint military exercises. Basically, it's when both Russian and Belarusian terrorists are running around in large groups wearing camo and pretending to be killing NATO soldiers while their generals are drinking at the observation tower. Most obviously, these drills are both training and strategic messaging at the same time. We can see large military maneuvers that keep Russia's terrorists exercised, or at least exercised to some extent, and send signals about Russia's regional posture to the NATO countries. Of course, it's both terrifying and laughable, considering the sheer number of Russia's personnel and the fact the largest country on Earth is effectively stuck in Ukraine for years. Over the past week, Ukraine continued long-range drone strikes and sabotage against Russia's military industry. Some of the recent ones took place on the night of September 13-14, when Ukrainian strikes targeted Russian oil, gas, railway and military infrastructure inside Russia and in the occupied Crimea. Ukraine's pattern is pretty much the same, because Ukraine is still focusing on Russia's logistics and energy sector, trying to degrade Kremlin's sustainment and also force Russia to divert its air defenses, its security assets to rear areas, so basically stretching whatever is left from the Russian air defenses. However, the only areas protected really well in Russia remain, of course, Putin's palaces. They are currently Russia's most precious objects on planet Earth. Meanwhile, experts report that Kremlin is facing a major budget problem, and eventually, instead of cutting military spendings, internationally wanted war criminal Putin may actually raise consumer taxes in Russia. I mean, it's obvious that there is nothing more important for Putin than killing Ukrainians at this point, not even the welfare of his own nation. On the other hand, though, what kind of welfare in the destitute Russian land can we even talk about? It's rather about their survival, which still matters much less to Putin than waging a never-ending war against Ukraine and its Western allies that Russia cannot win. Several assessments warned that increasing taxes could reverse any inflation gains that the Russian central bank has made up, and that lowering key interest rates will result in new economic problems for the happy Russian citizens. Switching to the front lines in Ukraine, the OSINT reports limited Russian advances near Pokrovsk and in western Zaporizhia Oblast. However, despite all the pressure coming from the mighty Russian army, these attacks are still described as localized advances rather than broad, decisive breakthroughs. Basically, on the strategic level, the picture didn't change much since 2024. The only difference is that Russia is rarely seen shooting more than 5,000 shells per day, compared to 10,000 in 2024 and 20 or 40,000 in 2022. And of course, they use donkeys much more often. Among the most notable operations that took place last week on the ground was Ukrainian counterattack in the area of Dobropillia, where a settlement of Pankivka was liberated from the Russian invaders. Of course, it means liberating whatever is left from the settlement after it was erased and occupied by the Russian terrorists. But still, it's good news, because Ukrainian defenders are not just sitting in defense, they also conduct counteroffensive operations and liberate Ukrainian territories. It's really important to remember about that. A few quick takeaways that we can make at this point is that Ukraine's campaign against Russia's logistics and energy infrastructure is pretty much effective, and it was basically designed to raise the cost of Russia's operations and force redeployment of Russia's defenses. According to ISW, the cross-border drone activity is increasing wider NATO involvement in defensive terms, as shown, for example, by Poland's actions. Will Ukraine's allies deploy their air force to close the skies over Ukrainian cities, which was something Ukraine has been asking since 2022? At this point, unfortunately, I think this question remains open, despite several plans published earlier this year. However, I think that things may change if Russia keeps launching its drones into the NATO territory. And the biggest takeaway is that the battlefield picture is still about localized positional changes. Those changes can become important over time, but globally, because we're talking about the war of attrition that Russia is clearly losing at this point, the strategy of slowly bleeding Russia's personnel and military potential overall is highly effective. It's not the best solution, but given the conditions and political situation with military supplies to Ukraine and everything else, it's the best thing Ukrainian defenders can do, and the fact is, they do it really well. With that, my dear friends and family, I wish you a beautiful day. Don't forget to subscribe to stay informed about the most important updates and share this content to help Ukraine be heard. I'll see you in the comments. I'm Operator Starsky. As always, be safe.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.